On the day of my husband's funeral, I woke with a hollowness that felt carved into my ribs. His name was Roderick, a man whose quiet strength carried me through every storm, and as rain stitched itself across the windows, I wondered how I'd walk through this day without collapsing. People think funerals are about saying goodbye, but to me they felt like admissions of defeat, acknowledgments that no amount of devotion could bargain with fate. My cousin Elsinore fussed over my hair while murmuring soft condolences, but her voice drifted like smoke around me, impossible to grasp. I kept seeing Roderick's last smile, the one he gave me 3 nights before the accident that supposedly took him. Supposedly, because some part of me still insisted something didn't add up. His supervisor at Phyroxian Dynamics, Mr. Alastair Keene, had shown up at my door the night after the crash, offering condolences with a stiffness that made my skin prickle. He said all the right words, yet his eyes kept flicking down the hallway behind me as if checking for someone. At the service, the chapel overflowed with coworkers, neighbors, and distant relatives. An ocean of umbrellas gathered outside, each one bobbing like a muted heartbeat. I sat in the front row, staring at the closed casket draped with white lilies Roderick once said reminded him of childhood. A closed casket. That fact alone gnawed at me. They'd told me it was better this way, that the impact had been too severe, but the explanation felt rehearsed, thin as tissue. When the ceremony ended, people drifted toward me in tidal waves of condolences, but their words washed through me without meaning. I just wanted to curl into myself, to disappear from the weight of being seen. It wasn't until I stepped outside that my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen expecting a message from Elsinore or one of the aunts, but instead I saw a name that made my breath stop. Mr. Alastair Keene. For a moment I considered ignoring it. What could Roderick's boss possibly want from me today of all days? But something in the pit of my stomach insisted I answer. I pressed accept and lifted the phone to my ear, my pulse pounding loud enough to drown out the rain. "Meloria," he said, his voice low and urgent like he was calling from the center of a storm. "You need to see something. Today. As soon as possible." My grip tightened on the phone. "Can't this wait?" I whispered. "It's my husband's funeral." "Sankt," he exhaled, a sound sharp and strained. "That's exactly why it can't." A coldness slid beneath my skin. "What do you mean?" There was a pause, filled only by distant shuffling as if he were moving through a corridor. "Meet me at the Phyroxian Research Annex," he said. "I'll explain everything there." Research Annex. The phrase hit me with the force of a memory. Roderick mentioning a new project, classified enough that he spoke of it only in riddles. "I don't understand," I said, my throat tight. "Wasn't he working downtown?" Another pause. "Meloria," he said, softer now. "Your husband wasn't where you think he was. Please, come now." He hung up before I could ask anything else. For a moment I stood frozen, the rain needling my cheeks, my mind spinning with questions that had no shape. Elsinore approached, her brows knit. "Everything all right?" I swallowed. "I need to go somewhere." "Now?" she asked. "But everyone's expecting—" "I know," I said, my voice trembling. "I'll explain later." She searched my face but didn't press. I slipped away from the crowd, climbed into my car, and stared at my reflection in the rain-slashed window. Widow. The word felt foreign, ill-fitting, like a borrowed coat. Yet some instinct, sharp, insistent, told me that today might unravel everything I thought I knew about Roderick's death. And maybe, just maybe, about his life. I turned the key in the ignition, the engine rumbling awake like a creature dragged from uneasy sleep. As I pulled away from the cemetery, a thought flickered through me. Fragile, impossible, but persistent. What if the funeral I just attended wasn't a goodbye at all? What if it was a warning? The road to the annex wound through the industrial outskirts of the city, a bleak stretch of warehouses and muted neon signs flickering through the drizzle. I tightened my hands around the steering wheel, trying to steady my breathing, but my thoughts chased themselves like frantic birds. Roderick had kept secrets before, small ones, harmless surprises or work stress he didn't want to burden me with, but this felt different, colossal, something that reached far beyond us. As I turned onto the narrow lane leading to the annex, I noticed the facility looked nothing like the sleek corporate offices downtown. Instead, it resembled a forgotten museum, its stone facade darkened by time and weather. A tall metal gate loomed ahead, already open as if expecting me. I parked and stepped out, the rain cooling into a mist that clung to my clothes. The air smelled faintly of ozone and damp stone, an unsettling combination that made me wonder what exactly Phyroxian was researching out here. The heavy door creaked open before I could knock. Mr. Keene stood framed in the dim light, his expression drawn, his suit rumpled in a way I had never seen. "Thank you for coming," he said, glancing over my shoulder as though checking if I'd been followed. "What's going on?" I asked, stepping inside. "Why bring me here?" He gestured for me to follow, leading me down a long corridor lined with frosted glass panels that hummed faintly. "There's something you need to understand about the project your husband was assigned to," he said. "Something that wasn't disclosed in any report." My throat tightened. "Are you saying the accident wasn't real?" I managed. He shook his head slowly. "It was not at all." I didn't remember walking to my car after Marcellus ended the call. It was as if my body moved on its own while my mind stayed frozen somewhere inside the church beside my husband's casket, replaying those 4 words, "You need to see this," over and over again until they began to take on a shape and weight I couldn't ignore. The cold air outside tasted metallic, like something had cracked open in the world. Something I had been too blind or too trusting to notice before now, and as I gripped my keys with shaking fingers, I wondered what kind of truth could compel a man like Marcellus Voss, controlled, discreet, impossibly disciplined, to call a grieving widow at her husband's funeral with such urgency. I drove without thinking, without breathing, without letting myself acknowledge the sickening possibility forming at the edges of my thoughts. And when I reached the gates of Voss Dynamics, the towering silver letters gleamed like they knew something I didn't. Security let me through instantly, their eyes flicking to the black funeral dress I still wore, and one of them even murmured an apology, as if he already knew what I was about to be dragged into. Inside, the air smelled of polished metal and expensive machines, the kind of environment my husband, Drystan, had once moved through with effortless confidence, always telling me that innovation lived in the bones of this place, that the future breathed in its walls. But now, all I could feel was dread pooling beneath my ribs. Marcellus was waiting for me in the hallway outside the executive lab, his posture rigid, his expression carved from stone, but the moment our eyes met, something inside his softened with a kind of grief that wasn't for my husband, but for whatever revelation he was about to hand me. "Calanthe," he said, stepping toward me as if approaching a fragile creature. "I'm sorry to pull you here today, but this couldn't wait." "What is this about?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded because it didn't match the terror gripping my heart. Marcellus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened the sliding frost glass door to the lab and gestured for me to follow him inside. And as I stepped over the threshold, a wave of cold, sterile air swept over my skin like a warning. The lights flickered on automatically, illuminating the room in a clinical glow. And there on the central metal table lay a folder, thicker than any research file I had ever seen my husband bring home, bound with a red seal I had never seen before. Marcellus didn't touch it. He stood beside it, with his hands clasped tightly behind his back, as though any contact might contaminate him. "Drystan didn't die the way you think he did," he said quietly, and the world tilted so violently I had to grip the edge of the table to stay upright. "What are you talking about?" I whispered, my throat tightening. "The detective said it was an accident." Marcellus exhaled slowly, like a man stepping into a confession he had rehearsed for hours. The detective was given what they needed to close the case quickly. But the truth, he paused, searching my face. The truth is more complicated. Something in his tone sliced through the fog of grief, dulling my senses. "Are you telling me the reports were falsified?" I asked. Marcellus nodded once. "Calanthe, Drystan didn't die on the highway the way the police described. His crash wasn't an accident, and he wasn't alone in that vehicle when it happened. My breath caught so sharply I nearly choked on it, my fingers curling against the cold metal table until they ached. Someone was with him? Who?" Marcellus didn't speak. Instead, he reached toward the sealed folder but stopped inches away, as though touching it would be a betrayal. "Everything is in here," he said. "The real investigation we conducted internally. The footage, the recovered data logs." My heartbeat roared in my ears, drowning out everything except the unbearable question that pushed itself out of my mouth. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" Marcellus's jaw tightened. "Because when it first happened, we didn't know who we could trust, including you." His words felt like another blow, but before I could react, he lowered his voice. Drysdale was involved in something, Calanthe, something that didn't just put him in danger, it puts you in danger now too. I stared at him, unable to breathe, unable to blink, unable to reconcile the man I married with the implications hanging in the air like a guillotine. Drysdale kept secrets from me, yes, but never anything that felt sinister, never anything that hinted at danger or conspiracy or the kind of betrayal that could rewrite the entire meaning of our life together. Marcellus continued, his voice almost a whisper. We found something he hid from everyone, even from me. A sudden tremor traveled through me so violently that Marcellus instinctively reached out, though he stopped short of actually touching me. His safe wasn't empty, he said, and before he died, he tried to warn us about something coming, something big. I felt my heartbeat stutter. Coming from where, I managed, or from whom? Marcellus hesitated for the first time since I arrived, and the hesitation terrified me more than anything he had said so far. That's what you need to see, he replied. It's all in the footage recovered from the wreckage, footage of the passenger who was with him. I felt my fingers go numb, my knees weaken, my vision sharpen to a painful clarity. A passenger, someone who shouldn't have been there, someone Drysdale hadn't told me about, someone who might have caused the crash, someone who might have killed my husband. Show me, I said, though my voice barely existed. Marcellus finally broke the red seal. My soul felt like it cracked open with it just to steady myself. The click of the broken seal echoed through the lab like a gunshot, too loud, too final, as if the universe itself acknowledged that whatever came next would carve a line straight through my old life and leave something unrecognizable in its place. Marcellus slid the documents from the folder with slow, deliberate movements, his hands steady but his jaw clenched so tightly I could see the tension pulsing at the hinge. And when he placed a thin black drive on the table beside the papers, something inside my chest tightened with a sensation too sharp to be grief and too cold to be fear. This contains the footage from the crash, he said, and there was something in his voice, a hollow, reluctant weight, that told me he wasn't merely delivering information, he was delivering a wound. He crossed to the monitor mounted on the far wall, the one Drysdale had once told me was state-of-the-art, capable of projecting even corrupted data with startling clarity, and as he inserted the drive, the room dimmed automatically, the lights sensing an active display. I remained rooted where I stood, my fingers digging into the edge of the metal table, grounding myself as the screen flickered to life with static, then shapes, then the unmistakable outline of Drysdale's vehicle navigating a stretch of road I recognized instantly, the narrow curve near Hollow Ridge, the place the police insisted had been slick with rain that night, but on the footage, the pavement glistened under street lamps, dry and harmless, contradicting everything I had been told. For a moment, all I could do was stare at the familiar shape of my husband's silhouette behind the wheel, his shoulders tense, his head turning sharply as if speaking to someone beside him. And when the camera angle shifted, I saw the passenger, only a partial profile, blurred at first, then clearer as the vehicle passed another light. My breath vanished. A woman. Her hair dark and braided over one shoulder, her face pale, her hands animated as she spoke, not frightened, not struggling, not held captive, comfortable, familiar as though she belonged there. I felt something twist violently in my stomach, a sensation like betrayal and disbelief and nausea, all fusing into one unbearable knot. Who is she? I whispered, barely able to form the words. Marcellus didn't look at me. Her name is Inara Thorne. Nafi said, she worked here until 8 months ago. Worked with him? The word lodged in my throat like a splinter. Closely, Marcellus replied, finally turning to face me. Closer than you knew. The footage continued, the interior camera capturing Drysdale arguing with her, his voice raised, hers sharp and unyielding, though the audio was corrupted and muffled, and the only word I could make out clearly was the one Drysdale yelled just before the vehicle swerved. No, it wasn't a plea. It was a command, forceful and frantic, and before I could process it, the footage jolted violently as the car veered hard to the right, the impact sending the camera into static. I flinched, closing my eyes, feeling the crash replay in my bones even without seeing the final moments. When the screen went dark, the silence that followed felt suffocating. I forced myself to breathe as I looked at Marcellus. Why wasn't she mentioned in the report? Why did the police say he was alone? Because someone interfered, he answered. Someone with enough influence to bury her identity and remove her body before emergency responders arrived. My heart slammed against my ribs. Remove her body, Marcellus nodded, and make it appear as though your husband was alone. I stared at him, feeling the room sway. Are you telling me someone staged the scene? Yes. Why? Marcellus inhaled deeply as if preparing to say something he had hoped he'd never have to speak aloud, because of what Dryston discovered in his final weeks. Something he shouldn't have uncovered. Something tied to Inara. My pulse hammered painfully in my neck. What was she to him? A colleague, a mistake, a risk? He finally met my eyes. And someone who didn't want the world to know what she had been doing inside this company. The hurt came so suddenly it felt physical, a blow to the center of my chest. Are you saying that they... I couldn't finish the sentence, the thought too raw, too jagged. Marcellus shook his head. I don't know what their relationship was outside of work, but I do know Dryston tried to cut ties with her, and days later, he died. My legs trembled. I leaned against the table for support. Why didn't you tell the authorities? I whispered. Marcellus's expression hardened. Because the authorities are compromised. Because whoever covered up the crash also erased Inara's employment records, disabled access logs, and scrubbed every trace of her from our internal systems. And whatever she was working on didn't leave with her. A chill rolled down my spine. What do you mean? She left something behind. Something she hid inside Dryston's restricted files. Something we can't decrypt without you. Me? I stared at him, stunned. I don't understand. Marcellus reached into the folder again, pulling out one last item, a small key card with my name etched in silver across its surface. Dryston upgraded your clearance level 6 days before he died, he said quietly, and according to this system, you're the only person he trusted to see what he uncovered. My breath caught. I felt the world narrowing, tightening into a single terrifying possibility. What did my husband find? Marcellus stared at me with an expression that carried both fear and certainty. You're about to find out, Calanthe. But whatever it is, he didn't die before telling you by accident. I swallowed hard, the truth settling into my bones like ice. Show me everything, I said. And with that, Marcellus inserted my keycard into the console. The screen blinked once. Then the file began to open. The screen pulsed softly as the encrypted file began to unravel, each loading bar inching forward with a deliberateness that made my skin prickle, as though the system itself understood the gravity of what it was about to reveal. Marcellus stood rigidly beside the console, his eyes fixed on the monitor with a mixture of dread and resignation, and I found myself holding my breath without realizing it, my pulse hammering so loudly in my ears that it felt like the room had shrunk around me. When the file finally opened, the first thing that appeared on the screen was a series of timestamps, long columns of dates and hours recorded in perfect precision, each line labeled with Dryston's ID tag, followed by terms I didn't recognize. A soft click echoed as Marcellus navigated to the first entry, and a recorded voice began to play. My husband's voice. Strained, hurried, the cadence unlike anything I'd ever heard spill from his lips. If anyone finds this before I tell Calanthe myself, the recording began, then I've run out of time. Something inside me clenched so violently I had to grip the edge of the console to steady myself, my heart twisting at the unmistakable dread threaded through his words. I never meant for any of this to touch her. She can't be dragged into this. The guilt in his voice hit me like a blow, but before I could absorb it, the recording jumped to a new clip, this time the sound of hurried footsteps, a door slamming, Dryston's breathing ragged. They're watching the lab. I can't access the servers from my office anymore. If she knew what we uncovered, if she knew what Inara was planning. God, what have we been funding without knowing? My breath caught, my mind racing with questions that tangled into a suffocating knot. What was he talking about? What had Inara planned? Marcellus's expression darkened as he paused the audio, turning to me with a heaviness in his eyes that made my stomach twist. There's more in video form, he said quietly, but it's not easy to watch. I nodded numbly, unable to form words, and he clicked the next segment. The screen shifted to footage recorded from Dryston's personal tablet, his face illuminated by the blue glow of the monitor behind him, his features drawn tight with exhaustion and fear. If Inara gets this proposal approved, the entire board will think it's a breakthrough, he said, running a trembling hand through his hair. But it's not a breakthrough. It's a weapon. A biotechnical system capable of rewriting neural patterns, not healing them, controlling them. A chill spread across my skin, a deep, visceral dread that settled beneath my ribs like a dark, living thing. Dryston leaned closer to the screen. She's already tested it, unauthorized, on people. Real people, Marcellus whispered beside me, confirming the horror forming in my mind. The next clip played automatically, showing fragments of lab notes, scanned documents. Diagrams of neural pathways overlaid with annotations written in Inara's precise, slanted handwriting. Words like override protocol and compliance threshold flashed across the screen, each one more chilling than the last. Dryston's voice returned, lower now, almost breaking. I confronted her, but she didn't deny it. She said we were on the verge of changing humanity, that free will was a flaw. My stomach turned violently as the footage shifted to a grainy camera feed. Inara and Dryston standing in one of the research wings, faces inches apart, their argument silent but furious. Dryston's hands moved in sharp, desperate gestures, while Inara remained eerily calm, her expression cool and confident, as if she held some unshakable advantage he could never touch. Then, almost too fast to catch, her eyes flicked toward the mounted camera, her lips curling into a faint smile before the feed cut to static. She knew she was being recorded, I whispered. Marcellus nodded grimly. She wanted him to know she wasn't afraid. The next video segment jolted violently as if recorded during a struggle, the camera angle skewed. Dryston's breath was loud, panicked. If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident, he said, the panic in his eyes unmistakable. Don't believe what they tell you. Don't... The feed cut abruptly. I stood frozen, the air crushed from my lungs, my entire body trembling as the truth crashed over me like a tidal wave. Dryston knew he was being hunted. He knew he might die, and he tried to warn me. Another file opened automatically, a report detailing the aftermath of a project failure months before Dryston's crash. 3 volunteers had withdrawn suddenly, citing unexplained memory lapses, disorientation, and hallucinations. But the documents were stamped confidential and buried behind layers of restricted access. Inara signed off on all 3. My heart pounded so violently that my vision pulsed at the edges. She experimented on them, without authorization, without oversight, without conscience. Marcellus exhaled slowly, his voice barely a whisper. Dryston tried to stop her. He tried to shut down the program entirely. But Inara had allies, people high enough to keep her shielded. I stared at the lines of data, the medical scans, the suppressed complaints, each page unraveling another layer of horror. Why didn't anyone else come forward, I asked, my voice raw. Because the people supporting her believed in her vision, Marcellus replied. They saw opportunity, profit, power, my mind reeled. My thoughts spiraling as I pressed a trembling hand to my forehead. And the crash? I said slowly, forcing myself to meet Marcellus's eyes. That wasn't just about silencing him. It was about protecting this. Marcellus nodded once, a heavy, grave acknowledgement. They couldn't risk him exposing her or the project. They needed to make sure he never spoke again. I swallowed hard, my throat burning. And Inara? Marcellus's jaw tightened, a shadow crossing his face. That's the part you haven't seen yet. He turned back to the console. Because she didn't die in the crash. My heart nearly stopped. She survived, Marcellus said, and she's been missing ever since. The revelation hit me like a bolt of lightning, sending a shiver down my spine that refused to fade, and I felt the room shrink around me as Marcellus leaned closer to the console, his fingers hovering over the keyboard as if he could somehow manipulate what had already happened. Inara survived the crash. She had been hiding, reorganizing, planning, and the weight of that knowledge pressed on me so heavily I could barely stand. My hands trembled, and I gripped the edge of the console to keep from collapsing as he continued. Her next move will be calculated, precise, and deadly. She knows you have the files Dryston left behind. She knows you know what she's capable of. I felt my stomach twist violently, a mix of fear and disbelief making it hard to breathe. Why would she come after me, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Because you're the only one who can connect the pieces, Marcellus said. She wants the project back under her control, and anyone who could unravel it, anyone who could tell the world what really happened, is a threat. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, and tried to imagine the woman behind the name, the brilliant scientist, Ruthless, methodical, unafraid to manipulate anyone and anything in her way. My mind raced as the screen flickered, opening the next file, a set of schematics Drystan had hidden in a secure folder, encrypted beyond casual access. The designs were elegant, almost beautiful, if not for their terrifying purpose: neural reprogramming units that could override motor functions, cognitive responses, even emotional regulation. Inara wanted to control humanity under the guise of advancement. I felt a surge of anger mixed with fear. How had we not seen this sooner? Drystan's foresight had been extraordinary. Every precaution he had taken, every encrypted file, every hidden recording was meant to protect me and the truth, and I realized with a sinking heart that his death, her apparent victory, was only a fragment of the danger I now faced. Marcellus's voice broke through my spiral of thoughts. "Lena, there's more." I froze, my pulse spiking as he opened a folder labeled Final. Within it were emails meticulously annotated by Drystan, showing attempts to warn the board, plead with security, and request independent audits of Inara's project. Each email carried a mounting sense of desperation, each ignored or dismissed by those who feared losing funding or prestige. One line stood out, written in sharp, precise handwriting that I recognized instantly. "If anything happens to me, ensure Lena sees this." It was a direct instruction meant to be a lifeline, a bridge of trust that now lay heavy in my hands. I pressed my lips together, staring at the text as Marcellus scrolled to a final attachment, a live tracking interface linked to several remote lab sites. One of the feeds, labeled Redwood Lab, pulsed faintly, showing an empty workspace, the lights flickering in a rhythmic pattern. Marcellus's voice dropped even lower. "You're looking at the lab she's operating from." The one Drystan couldn't reach. I felt my chest tighten, my thoughts colliding in a storm of fear and determination. If she's alive, she could strike at any moment. I have to stop her, but how? Marcellus leaned back, rubbing his temples. "That's the problem," he said. "Every security measure she installed is fail-safe. Any attempt to infiltrate could trigger alarms, or worse. She's been preparing for someone like us." I bit my lip, trying to swallow the panic rising in my throat. My mind flashed to the funeral, the day of his death, the calls, the whispered warnings, the silence of the city around me. It wasn't just grief that day. It was the first act in a play I had unknowingly stepped into, and now the stakes had escalated beyond anything I had imagined. I thought of Drystan's voice, etched into my memory, each recording a thread of warning I could no longer ignore. And then I thought of the people who trusted Inara, the scientists, the board members, even the security teams, blindly complicit, believing in her vision without questioning the cost. Marcellus pressed another key, and a new file appeared, a series of dossiers on individuals she had manipulated, coerced, or quietly removed from the project. Each dossier contained photos, behavioral notes, and detailed financial records. The scope of her influence was terrifying. She had allies everywhere, and for the first time I realized the true depth of the isolation Drystan had faced. I swallowed hard, my hands clammy, as Marcellus began speaking again, slowly, deliberately. "Lena, Drystan didn't just hide these files for his own safety. He left them for you, knowing you would need to understand the scale of what she's done and the scale of what she could still do. He trusted you to act." I nodded, my chest tight, absorbing the weight of responsibility. I hadn't even fully processed his death, and yet here I was, entrusted with the legacy of his life's work, and the knowledge that a single misstep could cost countless lives. The room fell silent, broken only by the soft hum of the console. I thought of my own hands, trembling slightly, and realized I had never felt more alive, more painfully aware of the stakes surrounding every decision I would make. "We need a plan," I said finally, my voice steadier than I expected. Marcellus's expression softened slightly, relief flickering in his eyes. "I've been waiting for you to say that," he replied. "We can't confront her head-on. Not yet. We need leverage, evidence, allies, and a way to secure the labs before she realizes we know she's alive." I nodded, mentally racing through the options. If we could move quickly, intercept her communications, and secure the physical files, we could prevent her from executing her next stage. But the risks were immense, the balance delicate, and time. Time was no longer our ally. I opened my mouth to ask a question, but Marcellus held up a hand. "One step at a time," he said. "First, we need to reach Calanthe. He has to know what we've discovered, and he needs to help us navigate the legal, ethical, and logistical minefield we're about to enter." I nodded, thinking of the quiet authority of Calanthe, the only person I trusted to remain rational when the chaos inevitably escalated. "Then we need to prepare," he continued, voice low and urgent. "Surveillance, backups, contingency plans. If she suspects we're onto her, she could move faster than we expect, strike before we're ready." My mind spun, trying to hold every variable, every possibility, every threat and countermeasure in place. Finally, I realized the truth of it. We were no longer just uncovering a hidden project or exposing corruption. We were defending the very lives of the people who had unknowingly been caught in her orbit. And somehow, by some stroke of fate, Drystan had entrusted me with that responsibility. I felt a surge of determination I hadn't known I possessed, a clarity that overrode fear. I was no longer just the grieving widow, the passive observer of tragedy. I was an active participant in a dangerous, high-stakes battle, armed with evidence, allies, and the unshakable memory of a man who had sacrificed everything to protect the truth. Marcellus leaned back, his eyes scanning the monitors one last time. "Are you ready?" he asked. I drew a deep breath, feeling the adrenaline pulse through me, steadying the tremor in my hands. "Yes," I said, my voice firm. "We begin now." The next steps would be treacherous, unpredictable and terrifying, but for the first time since Drystan's apparent death, I felt the strange exhilaration of purpose. I had been called to act, and act I would. There would be no hesitation, no fear overriding the mission. I would uncover the truth, confront Inara, and ensure that Drystan's sacrifice and his warnings had not been in vain. And somewhere deep inside me, a quiet resolve whispered, "I will not fail him. I will not fail the truth." The plan unfolded slowly, carefully, with each step meticulously coordinated between Marcellus, Calanthe, and me. And I felt a strange combination of fear and exhilaration as we monitored the lab feeds, reviewed the encrypted communications, and traced Inara's patterns of movement. Every alert, every flicker on the screen made my pulse race, but it also sharpened my focus. I realized I had spent so long in mourning, in a haze of grief and confusion, that I had almost forgotten what it felt like to fight, to strategize, to assert control over my own life. And now I was engaged in a battle that demanded every ounce of attention I could muster. We had secured redundancies for the files Drystan had hidden, created backups, and positioned allies at key entry points, ready to intercept anyone attempting unauthorized access. Marcellus handled the technical aspects with precision, his fingers flying across the console as he guided me through the process of reinforcing digital firewalls and monitoring all incoming traffic. I watched the schematics of the lab overlay on the monitors, tracing potential paths Inara could use, anticipating every possible move. My mind was a whirlwind of scenarios, but beneath the adrenaline, a sense of calm determination anchored me. When she finally appeared on one of the cameras, her presence was as commanding and chilling as I had imagined. Her eyes scanning the lab, calculating, precise. She moved with a purpose that left no room for hesitation. In that instant, I realized why Drystan had been so meticulous in his precautions. This woman was brilliant but ruthless, and we were still catching up to her every thought, every decision. I leaned closer to the screen as Marcellus whispered, "She knows someone is monitoring. Be ready." And I felt it. An icy, visceral awareness that every second counted, that any misstep could cost us everything. I took a deep breath, steadying my hands, and remembered Drystan's voice from the recordings, the calm authority, the insistence on precision and secrecy. He had trusted me to act, to protect the truth, and I would not let him down. The first confrontation was tactical rather than physical. Marcellus had rigged a series of lockdown protocols within the lab's system, which allowed us to control entrances and exits remotely. When Inara reached the main control hub, the doors locked with a mechanical click that echoed ominously in the silence. I watched as she paused, her fingers hovering over the console in frustration, her usually flawless composure cracking for a fraction of a second. That was all we needed. Calanthe, positioned outside the building with the legal and enforcement teams, was ready to move. We had the evidence, everything Drystan had hidden, everything she had manipulated, and now we had the means to contain her without putting ourselves at immediate physical risk. I felt a surge of relief, but also an odd guilt, knowing that this confrontation, though necessary, would change everything. Inara had been a mentor to some, a visionary to others, and yet her obsession with control had created a danger that could not be ignored. When the enforcement team entered the lab, Inara's expression shifted from shock to calculated defiance. But the moment she saw the evidence, the files, the recordings of her own plans, her confidence faltered. I watched from the monitors as she realized the depth of exposure, the undeniable proof of her manipulations, her false medical reports, and the networks of coercion she had built. And I felt an unexpected clarity, a sense of justice unfolding before me. Marcellus guided me through each step, confirming that the system had secured all critical files and that Inara's access had been completely cut off. The legal ramifications were immediate and severe. She would face charges for fraud, coercion, and multiple counts of endangerment, and we had all the evidence to ensure her conviction. As the enforcement team escorted her from the building, I allowed myself a moment to exhale fully for the first time in weeks, feeling the weight of fear and uncertainty lift from my shoulders. Dryston's foresight had saved countless lives, and now I understood the true measure of his genius and courage. In the aftermath, the process of restoring security and transparency to the project was painstaking but necessary. Marcellus and Calanthe worked tirelessly to ensure that all sensitive data was properly archived, audited, and distributed to trusted personnel. I participated fully, learning the systems, understanding the safeguards, and feeling a growing confidence in my own abilities. I realized that grief had not weakened me, it had prepared me. Prepared me to be vigilant, to act decisively, and to protect what truly mattered. Once the immediate crisis was resolved, I returned home, and the quiet that greeted me was different this time. It was not the oppressive, hollow silence of loss. It was the calm after a storm, filled with a sense of regained autonomy and purpose. I walked through my house, noting every detail, every corner, appreciating the life that remained and the control I had reclaimed. That night, I sat with a notebook, documenting everything, creating a personal archive of lessons learned and a record of Dryston's legacy. I felt the grief for him and the relief of survival intertwine, creating a complex but deeply grounding emotion. In the following weeks, life slowly began to normalize. I reconnected with friends, rebuilt routines, and began exploring new interests that I had long postponed. Marcellus remained a steady presence, a reminder of the intellect and loyalty that had guided me through the chaos, and Calanthe provided legal counsel that ensured every step taken was secure and above reproach. One morning, as I sipped tea on the porch and watched the sunrise, I realized that I had grown stronger in ways I had never anticipated. I had faced deceit, danger, and profound uncertainty, and I had emerged capable, clear-headed, and unafraid. The world seemed larger, more navigable, and full of possibilities I had once thought closed. And yet there was a lingering reflection on trust, loyalty, and the unpredictable paths of human nature. I knew that vigilance was never truly complete, but I also knew that I had the resources, the insight, and the courage to face whatever came next. In the quiet of that morning, I made a decision that would define the years ahead. I would live fully, intentionally, and with a clarity born of surviving both grief and danger. I would honor Dryston's trust by maintaining integrity, by protecting the truth, and by embracing the life I had reclaimed. The roses outside bloomed in vibrant defiance against the shadows of fear, each petal a testament to resilience and renewal. I smiled, feeling a deep, unshakable sense of freedom. The world had shifted, irrevocably and painfully, but it had shifted toward clarity, toward justice, and toward a life that was truly mine. And so, as I watched the sunlight stretch across the garden, illuminating each detail with exquisite precision, I allowed myself to breathe deeply, fully, without reservation. The future was uncertain, yes, but I faced it with a calm confidence I had never known before. My heart, once heavy with grief, now carried the possibility of renewal, discovery, and unexpected joys. And in that moment, I understood what Dryston had known all along, that courage, clarity, and truth are the most powerful tools we possess, even in the face of overwhelming odds. I thought of the days of mourning, of the fear and confusion, and of the silent instructions that had guided me toward action, and I realized that I had honored them, not just by surviving, but by living consciously, deliberately, and without compromise. This morning, as I sit with a cup of tea and the sun warming my face, I remember the call that started it all, the one that pulled me from grief into action. And I know that everything I have done has been both necessary and transformative. Did you like my story? If you listened till the end, drop a number 1 in the comments. If you enjoyed it, you can support me by liking the video and sending a small tip. I've got lots of other life stories like this on my channel, so make sure to subscribe and check them out. I've added 2 new stories on screen that everyone loves. Thanks for being here. See you in the next one.